Cheryl Horton, our first. Good idea, thank you. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Cheryl Horton with MidCoast Watersheds Council to talk about her work. Thanks.
Well, thanks everybody, and thanks Tom for all those announcements. That was great. So today I'm going to be talking about the Oregon Central Coast Estuary Collaborative Focused Investment Partnership. And this initiative is called Restoring Resilience in 2 Estuaries. So we're going to dig into sort of what the OCCEC is, what is a focused investment partnership, and what we're planning to do. So the Oregon Central Coast Estuary Collaborative is this really interesting group that is made up of over 40 different organizations. I think we have 70 to 100 people on the list right now. These are all folks who are working in conservation and restoration of tidal wetlands. And they're really engaged in information sharing so that everyone can learn and advance this art and science going forward. So if you're interested in learning more about the OCCEC, you can go to the website at the URL on the top of this page. And it's also really important to mention that this consortium of people came together to put together this very detailed application to go after this FIP, or Focus Investment Partnership funding. So what is the FIP? Well, the FIP is this funding opportunity that is administered by the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, or OWEB. And it's a relatively new program. The first 3 FIP partnerships were awarded in 2022. So there are 2 south of us, one in the Siuslaw and one in the Coos. And those are focused on coho. Ours is the first one that's focused on coastal estuaries. And so even though this group, OCCEC, came together, because they're a consortium of organizations, they needed one nonprofit to sort of be the applicant on this grant and also administer that grant. And that's where MidCoast Watersheds Council comes in. And that's one of the things I was hired to do. So this FIP was awarded in 2022, and it invests $7.8 million over 3 bienniums. And it's complicated in the sense that OWEB doesn't just hand us a check for $7.8 million. They sort of set this fund aside in chunks for each biennium. And then we apply for grants to do specific types of projects in 2 estuaries. And so those project types are tidal marsh restoration in areas of existing tidal range, protection and restoration of scrub, shrub, and forested wetland habitat, and then also protection and restoration of current and future potential tidal wetlands within these things called landward migration zones. And I just threw a bunch of jargon at you, so we're going to walk through what all those things are and sort of explain them. And to accomplish these projects, we will eventually work on different sites, and at those sites we may do one of these project types, or we may do all 3. And so the way we go about this is we apply underneath the FIP for additional grants. Some of them are for stakeholder engagement, some of them are for technical assistance, some are for restoration, some are for monitoring work, and then I forgot to mention some of them are also for acquisition, so getting land into conservation ownership. And the logos that you see at the bottom are our FIP partners, 4 partners and partners on this initiative. So we all work together to make this happen. Okay, so the 2 estuaries that we're focused on are right here in Lincoln County. It's the Yaquina and the Alsea. And for the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to be talking just about the Yaquina estuary. So just so that we're starting all on the same page, I know a lot of you are experts on this topic already, but for those of you who aren't, there are a bunch of different habitat types within tidal wetlands. And so what we're looking at here is sort of a cross section of the estuary. And you can see in the submerged water, it's deep, it's always underwater. And then where the tide influences, what's happening there is based on the elevation. So when you look at this area here where we see mudflats on low tide, that's going to be exposed. There's different substrate types. That's where eelgrass is growing, marine algae, things like that. Really important nursery habitat for a lot of species. As the elevation continues to creep up, we get into tidal marsh habitat. So that's where you have emergent vegetation, grasses, sedges, things like that. We have low marsh and high marsh. And then as you continue to creep upward, that's where we get into this tidal swamp habitat that's a little bit less well understood. And there are 2 areas. So about 8 feet above sea level of elevation, you get into this scrubby, shrubby habitat. And then as you creep up a little bit more, closer to 10 feet, you get into this spruce swamp habitat. And then the last thing I want to mention is that there are areas within our or next to our estuaries that are not currently influenced by the tide. But we know from sea level rise modeling and predictions that they may be inundated in the future. And so some of the projects that we're looking at are to conserve those areas or do some work now so that in the future, if they are inundated by sea level rise, that they're ready to become some type of one of these tidal wetland habitats. So I don't want to belabor that, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so you might be wondering, when we're talking about these tidal swamps, where are we looking? When you look at this map of the Yaquina Estuary, what I want you to take away is that the dark blue is the historical extent of forested wetlands in our estuary. And the red, which you probably have trouble seeing, is the current extent of those forested wetlands. So there's only about 6% of this habitat left. And that's one of the reasons why we're interested in the protection of and the conservation of these habitats. So that was a lot to throw at you all at once. How do we do this? The first way that we do this starts with people. So we do stakeholder engagement. We get together with landowners and we talk to them about what their goals are, for their property. That could be private landowners. It could be state parks. It could be the Forest Service. So we work with a variety of different landowners. And once we understand what their goals are for their property on the estuary or adjacent to it, we can help them do projects. So let's say they want to do a restoration project on their land. MidCoast or OCCEC through the FIP can help them get funding to do that, expertise, technical expertise, all the things that are necessary to make that happen. Another way that we can do stakeholder engagement is to talk to folks if they want their land to go into conservation ownership. So that can happen through folks donating their land, that can happen through purchases of land, that can happen through things called life estates. And we work with a variety of different land trusts and experts to help us provide that expertise to folks. We can also work with folks on conservation easements. Another way that we do stakeholder engagement is through workshops in these estuaries that help teach how to do something that folks might be interested in doing, either on their land or related to their estuaries. So that's one of the first steps. Specifically in the Yaquina, we're putting in some grants this fall, and one of them is to do a tidal wetland assessment and prioritization on the South and North Yaquina Bay Road. So we're working with our partners at Ducks Unlimited. They're going to be looking at culverts, building off of work that the Nature Conservancy did, looking at tide gates in these areas. They're going to be looking at wetlands that are sort of adjacent or on the other side of those. And when those are prioritized, we can reach out to landowners, and let's say there's an old or undersized culvert that's maybe a fish passage barrier. We can work to get funding and work with them to get those things replaced. So that's one of the things that we're starting up and are in the planning phases of right now. Some of you may be familiar with this slide or with this area. This is King Slough on the south side of the Yaquina Estuary. This is an example of what it looks like there at low tide and then at a very high tide or a king tide. And you can see on the far, my left, your right, there's a road located there, and at low tide, that's a passable road. On king tides, we walked out here, it was about up to my knees. And so this is an opportunity for us to think about what is life going to be like under sea level rise, right? If this becomes the norm, we have some things that we should probably address from an infrastructure standpoint and from a habitat standpoint. And when you take a look at the culverts here, you can see that they're relatively undersized, they're older, they're starting to degrade. And so what we're planning to do is an assessment where we can work with experts and engineering firms and say, what are our options here? People still need to get to the other side of this. We want wildlife to be able to cross here. Can we put a larger culvert here? Can we put a bridge? Is there a way to reroute this road around, or is there nothing we can do? Hopefully the answer is there's something that we can do, and that benefits fish, wildlife, plants, and also our human communities. So ultimately, in addition to fish barriers, right, we want to get to this tidal wetland restoration, this on the ground work. And this is a really nice example of a project that happened in the upper Yaquina Estuary. This is a site called Y27. What you're looking at is an aerial photograph of a piece of land that was disconnected from the estuary. There was a dike, there were ditches, it kept the tide out. And what happened here was that dike was taken out, tidal channels were dug, large wood was placed, and native vegetation was planted. And what this led to is a different sort of scenario and regime where this area was then reconnected to the tide. And this is what it looks like at a high tide. It's flooded. And this is good for a lot of reasons. This is good for juvenile salmon. As they spread out over the wetlands, they're able to eat invertebrates and they're able to grow. The large wood and those channels hold water, provide refuge for them at low tide. And this is also really great because it slows down water. And that's really good for human communities, right? Because that can help us be more resilient to flooding. It can help us with erosion and other things like that. And so there are really natural solutions and things that we can do to start adapting to climate change that are good for wildlife, ecosystems, and people. And that's what our focus is. And I put monitoring on the bottom here because we want to learn from everything that we're doing. So tidal wetland restoration science is ever evolving. And by collecting data before, during, and after these projects, we're able to take those lessons learned, share them with others. And one of the things that I like to say is a rising tide lifts all boats. So I love the collaborative nature of this work, and I am really excited for the suite of projects that we are anticipating going forward. And at this point, I'd be really happy to take any questions you might have. Okay. Yes. The question was, what is the approximate lifetime of a culvert? And I think the answer to that is it depends. So there are probably people in this room who know this a lot about this a lot better than I do. But I think some of the infrastructure that we have here along the bay is approaching its lifetime, or is sort of passing its lifetime, and things are degrading. So I can't give you like a specific answer for that. But does anybody else want to chime in with their thoughts?
I can answer a little bit of that question.
Great.
The Yaquina Watershed, Roseburg area is a significant basin. They did a basin-wide culvert assessment, and approximately 40% of them were barriers, either to adult salmon trying to get up to spawning grounds, or to juveniles. You've got to think about both life history stages, when they're returning to gravel, as well as the juveniles that are dispersing within the watershed. So culverts can be a problem at both stages. So that light bulb has been going off in this last 10 to 15 years, that we built roads without really understanding that whole story about passage. So I would say that there's a lot of work to deal with improving culverts passage.
And I just wondered, the work you're doing now, if you're going to be working, how long is that expected to last?
Oh,
So that's why that's an approximate lifetime.
it depends on the type of culvert, but you're looking at more like 50 to 100 years. Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Culverts put in were not well designed. They weren't designed for the amount of flow that goes through, the things that Paul talked about. They were just kind of just standard practices and slapped in. I'm gonna guess those are good for, I don't know, maybe 50 years, something like that, depending on various circumstances. The ones that we put in are designed quite differently, upgraded to handle the level of flows that are going to go through there, and with more engineering and just more state-of-the-art design and construction to withstand the elements that it's going to be handling. So will they be good for longer than 50 years? I don't know, but they're going to be, in general, much better than the ones that they're replacing, not only in function, but I would say in duration as well.
Thank you for that. Tom, should we move to the next speaker?
Yeah.
Great. Well, we can take more questions after everyone presents, and happy to address those.
Thank you, Cheryl. Great discussion, everybody. Next up, we've got Megan Hoff, who is Senior Planner with Lincoln County, to talk about the changes to the estuary management plan.
Good evening, everyone. Many thanks to the MidCoast Watersheds Council for having me tonight. We're appreciative to share our work on the project that we've undertaken for the last several years in concert with other jurisdictions and entities to update and modernize the Yaquina Bay Estuary Management Plan. And to me, this document is also a celebration. This update process is also meant to recognize the accomplishments of what this estuary management plan has protected over the last 40 years. For places such as this, does anyone know where this is? Paul, you know. Yeah, I knew you would know. So that's Pool Slough looking from north to south. And so the estuary management plan acts as a regulatory layer of protection on places like this that deserve and need to be protected for both ecosystem and human services and enjoyment. So the estuary management plan was adopted by Lincoln County and the other jurisdictions in 1982. It's a regulatory document that details the prescribed uses in an estuary. And so this is an example of what the original plan looks like. And for this update process, we only focused on the Yaquina Bay due to funding and our resource constraints. But this document is meant to serve as a prescription for how uses in estuaries are protected or permissible for development. And so we've worked with the city of Newport and the city of Toledo to update this the Yaquina portion of the estuary management plan. And it's been a comprehensive update process guided by the Willamette Partnership and the University of Oregon that have served as partners to help us modernize and update this plan. A lot of folks are asking, why has it taken 40 years to update this plan? But truthfully, the plan has been extremely effective at conserving the places that need to stay conserved and allowing development in the places where it makes sense to develop. There has not been a need, an overarching need to update the plan since then, and it speaks to the strength of the plan from when it was created, as well as the resource inventory information that was used for the original intent of the plan too. And so what I'll be focusing on is the Yaquina portion of the estuary management plan. And the estuary management plan is a spatial representation. It takes the estuary and it breaks it down into geographic specific management units. And so we take those management units and in accordance with Goal 16 requirements, we classify them in 3 different ways. They're classified either as development, conservation, or natural. And this is based on the specific resource characteristics and capabilities of each of the management units. The management units are then geographically described within the text, and that guides land use decisions and where development may or may not occur in the estuary. This is a picture of King Slough, and it is currently within a natural management unit, which means that no alterations, minor or major, are permitted, albeit a few small things, such as if you wanted to do like a recreational type activity that had no impact to that management unit, that would be a permissible use. But by and large, that's why you see these areas remaining in the current state that they are, is because they have that development protection through the estuary management plan. So what exactly have we done through this update and modernization process? Well, one of them is digitizing all of our paper maps. So this is a regulatory document, believe it or not. This is what we currently use right now to make land use decisions within the estuary. So as I described, this estuary is broken down into individual management units. They're all labeled on this map, 1, 2, 3, up to 34. And it's important to note, so how the estuary is defined is from mean high water, or the line of non-aquatic vegetation, whichever is further landward, up to the extent of the head of tide. A lot of people have asked why Boone Slough is not connected to the estuary. That's right here. And that's because it's not tidally connected. If and when one day it is restored tidally, then that would be evaluated to see what classification it should have. So at this point, Boone Slough actually has other layers of protection through Goal 17, which is coastal shorelands. There are several identified significant marshes and riparian vegetation that act as a layer of protection for that area. So this map also doesn't accurately show head of tide. It's actually further upstream. And from this map, we are now operating under hopefully something that looks like this. So with modernization capabilities with our geographic information systems, we can have a more effective way of viewing these management units. And this way, if you look, the colors aren't significant in this map because it's a cartoon and they needed a way to differentiate between colors because they didn't have the computer capability to make it all one color and for it to stand out for the management units. There are no individual maps for any of these management units in the current plan. So for this map, all of the management units that are in each of the classifications are one color. So you can see the yellow, the canary yellow, those are natural management units. The cyan blue, those are conservation management units, and the purple is development. So this snaking purple here, that's the federally authorized navigation channel where dredging is allowed to occur with the Army Corps of Engineers. That has to remain a development unit because it's a major alteration in the estuary. You can see here that this is King Slough. You have McCaffrey Slough and you have Pool Slough here. And I forget some of the names of these smaller sloughs, but all of those entities are at the highest level of protection that they can be through the estuary management plan with the natural management unit. Some exciting things that have happened through this update process is adding new management units because of restoration work done by the MidCoast Watershed Council and the Wetlands Conservancy. So for instance, Cheryl showed, I believe it was the tidal restoration of this portion of the Yaquina estuary in the last slide where they tidally reconnected this to, which then warranted its inclusion within the estuary management plan. And so because of that, and because it's considered a large tract of tidal marsh, that warranted the designation of a natural management unit. And so now our proposal is to add 34A as a new management unit designated or classified, I'm sorry, as natural. And it extends to the two portions here and here. Something new that was just recently decided on, and I know we released it on the website, was adding 34B. So this is a major tract of tidal scrub wetlands and forested wetlands here that will be added as a new natural unit too. The Wetlands Conservancy owns the upper portion of this and the private ownership is in the southern portion of that too. So reevaluating each of the management units with current resource inventory data from CMEX, as well as in consultation with experts from ODF&W and other subject matter experts. We've reevaluated the management units and some of them have had boundaries shifted to capture important resources that should have been or were intended to be captured and might not have been accurately when the plan was originally written. We have also proposed some changes in classification. So along the jetties here, those were originally classified as conservation, but that was an incorrect classification because jetties are considered major alterations within estuaries, and the maintenance and repair of those jetties is critical infrastructure. And so we had to correct that mistake from the original plan and reclassify that as development, which does not open the floodgate for additional other development activities to occur. It simply allows the continued maintenance and and repair of the jetty. And no other, there's a special policy that limits other types of development that could occur besides the jetty maintenance and repair. So having that consistency is important. And then I also wanted to talk about too, this is upstream by Toledo. And this is an example of the type of the forested swamp that was captured in the new natural management unit. We did receive some comments from an ODF&W avian biologist, and they asked to have some climate vulnerabilities added in, speaking to shorebirds that use some of these different natural management units and other management units within the estuary. What I forgot to mention earlier was that climate vulnerabilities are being added into the estuary management plan. That was not a consideration in the original plan. And now it's being added as part of, the application process. When someone is proposing a use or activity in the estuary, they have to consider, a suite of climate vulnerabilities and how those vulnerabilities will impact what they're proposing to do. So that's new, and innovative in this management, in the update of this management plan. So, I could say a lot more, but I know we have another speaker tonight, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to speak about this important update process. And if you have any questions, that's my contact information. And if you have questions about anything I've said, I'd be happy to take them at the end with after the other speaker. Or if we have time for one now, we can also do that too.
We can do one question right now, but.
Okay. Oof, we have a very special guest in the front row, and I feel like I really want to hear her question. So, Miss Gemma, what's your question?
I was kind of saying, like, what was about, like, one of the words that I forgot.
That's okay. We really appreciate your attendance tonight and for being such a good audience member.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay,
I have,
sure.
looking at your map of Boone Slough.
Mhm.
I was just curious if that sort of showed the historical boundary of the title,
This one or that?
yeah, well, either one.
Oh, no, that was not intended to show the historical boundary. This is based on conditions at the time. We actually are including a map of the historical extent of the estuary in the new plan as a map.
The
So,
reason I ask, it just seems like it'd be a great natural buffer for any kind of, tidal wave, if we ever get that, to open that up a little more so it has room for water to get in there.
yeah, there's currently tide gates that are managed by Drainage District number 4 at the mouth of both Newt and Boone. I forgot which one is which, but I think it's Boone and Newt.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Portions, yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's an active drainage district that manage those tide gates, so, but if for some reason in the future those tide gates are no longer, then, yes, it would be tidally reconnected and, depending on the type of conversations we have, it would probably qualify for a natural management unit.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
yeah. Okay, we can move on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Megan. So we're gonna do a transition here to Michael Moses from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, who's presenting from Salem tonight. And so I will ask him to unmute himself and share his screen. Of course, technology loves to cooperate the first time every time. There you go. Can you hear me? All right, try one more time. Can everyone hear me? Oh, let's try this. How about now? Getting better. We're getting there. Okay, can you try one more time? Can you hear me? This looks like it's working online. And for the folks in the back here, it's probably not loud enough for you guys, huh? Are you able to hear?
I'm on this little speaker here, Brian, James.
Let's see. It's the first time we've done this, so.
On this side, you see the plus and minus. on
Oh,
this side.
yes.
How's it sound?
Much
Much better.
Nice.
All right, and can folks see me? I can't see you.
We can see you.
Great. As soon as you're ready.
Go for it.
Great, thank you. Hi, folks. I'm Michael Moses. I am the Estuarine Resilience Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD. We are the lead agency for the Oregon Coastal Management Program, which is supported by NOAA dollars under the Coastal Zone Management Act. And it's a network of 10 or 11 state agencies and organizations. So we coordinate and oversee development of those estuary management plans that Megan was just talking about, and all things Goal 16 related. Me personally, as the Estuarine Resilience Coordinator, I've been tasked with coordinating a planning process that I'm going to tell you about tonight, and that's the Estuarine Resilience Action Planning Process, or ERAP, as we're calling it. And this is a process that is the brainchild of myself and a former coworker. We came up with sometime around when COVID was just hitting hard, and we had a lot of time to think. And it's supported by a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, which is an organization that re-grants NOAA dollars, in case you're not familiar already. So what this process does is it's engaging in development of these plans, which are specific to certain coastal jurisdictions. And these plans will identify and outline needs, actions, goals, and priorities for nature-based solutions to increase resilience to the impacts of storms, flooding, tsunamis, climate change, and other natural hazards in coastal communities situated around Oregon's estuaries. So planning efforts in recent years often seek to build local capacity in these communities for coastal resilience planning and implementation. When with this funding that we have now from NIFWIF, we're trying to unify coastal resilience coordination and planning in order to bolster some of the other planning efforts that are going on, such as updates to estuary management plans, and strengthen some of our partnerships on the coast for future coastal planning and management. So the approach of this planning process is bottom-up, community-driven. So we want to represent what local concerns are. So what are the needs and concerns in the local communities that are situated around the estuaries that deal with the natural hazard impacts associated with the estuaries, because we at DLCD in Salem or wherever we happen to be don't necessarily have a strong intimate grasp of the local issues. It's led by community organizations and steered by working groups that are composed of local stakeholders, often folks who have technical expertise or other relevant backgrounds for coastal planning and implementation of on-the-ground projects. But it also includes a broader community stakeholder outreach and engagement effort to make sure that we are including all the community interests and key points in the process. At DLCD, my role is to play the facilitator and the coordinator for this planning process. This process engages multiple stakeholders, as I already mentioned. So it includes the public, community leaders, community organizations, municipal governments, academia, and many other stakeholders. It's assisted by technical expertise. So for this current round of planning, we're partnering with Oregon State University and the Cascadia COPES Hub folks, which is a multi-university consortium that's invested in planning and natural hazard resilience management in the coastal states. In our prior planning effort that we just wrapped up, and I'll tell you about in a few minutes, we partnered with the University of Oregon and the Institute for Policy Research and Engagement. We also partner with our Oregon Coastal Management Program agency partners and many other organizations with relevant skill sets and institutional knowledge. The process leverages existing and anticipated planning efforts which are currently under review. So some of the things like the estuary management plan updates to natural hazard mitigation plans, and other action planning and vulnerability assessment type work that's occurred in the past. It's scientifically grounded and guided, leaning heavily on existing planning guidance and other literature. It's specific to each jurisdiction. So each plan is tailor-made for that jurisdiction as guided by the locals from those communities to fill in the planning gaps where needed. So the current, or the process that we just wrapped up, it was a 2-year process, and it took place in Tillamook and Coos counties. So you can see there on the graphic at right that some of those estuaries that we were focused on. So we're really looking at the major estuaries for Tillamook County. It's 5 major estuaries. It's Nehalem, Tillamook, Netarts, Sand Lake, and Nestucca. And down in Coos, it was Coos Bay and the Coquille River estuary. But that process just wrapped up here at the end of August. So this week I'm kicking off our next 2-year process, focused on Lincoln and Lane counties next. So we'll be focusing on the major estuaries in those counties, including Yaquina Bay. And so some of you in the room may be getting emails and phone calls from me to gauge your interest and level of ability to support and participate in the process. So we'll try and develop 2 more estuarine resilience action plans for those counties. And of course, focus on the estuarine areas, as I've already established. The geographic scope that we're really focused on is pretty much anything that's within the coastal zone within each of these jurisdictions that lies within the sphere of estuarine influence, let's say. So even though on the map that Megan showed, we can see the estuarine boundary, as we all know, the areas that are impacted by the estuary or that conversely impact the estuary often extend well beyond those boundaries, all the way up into the uplands at times. So, I'm trying not to be too prescriptive about the process and really leave it to local communities and stakeholders to tell us where the needs and concerns are. And that's what we'll focus on as long as there's some direct connection to the estuary. So trying to think about things like areas of historic floodplain that maybe have been diked off or separated in some way that may, in the event of say a large winter storm, suddenly become relevant in terms of where we might expect water to be and not be. And so why is this planning process really focused on the estuaries necessarily? And that's because, as you may know, Oregon's coastal population is largely situated around the estuaries. So we figured, we'll get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of planning energy and capacity if we focused on those areas around the estuaries. And you can see in the graphic that I have there at right, this is taken from NIFWIF's Coastal Resilience Evaluation and Siting Tool. The darker red the area, basically, it's a composite index of all the different threats and vulnerabilities for natural hazards. So the darker the red, the more vulnerable, the greater the threat of natural hazards. And so it's clear when we're looking from a coastwide view that the locus of our planning concern should be centered around the estuaries. And so briefly, the planning process is a 3-phase process that we'll be engaging in over these next 2-ish years or so. Phase 1 is our estuarine resilience needs assessment. So this is where we establish the local context for resilience. By identifying what those local needs and priorities are. We do this through plan review, through stakeholder outreach and engagement to garner community feedback. This comes in the form of emails, individual interviews, surveys, community listening sessions, and adaptation action planning workshops. And so through all of those efforts, we try to identify and describe what the potential resilience activities and adaptation actions are that we should be focusing on in these estuarine areas. In phase 2 is the resilience strategy and adaptation action development. So in phase 2, we really try to nail down what are those adaptation actions that have kind of risen to the surface from all of that engagement. And this includes, actions that folks say, well, you know, we have this street downtown has a vulnerable, you know, block on it, or a neighborhood here, or this infrastructure there. You know, if we had a blank check, what we really need to do is upgrade the marina or whatever it might be, and try to compile all of those and develop all of those out, and evaluate which ones are, you know, let's say ripe for development. But it could also include actions that our stakeholders and our partners are already engaged in planning. So things like what the Watershed Council might be doing if we're looking at upgrading culverts or pulling out tide gates or trying to reconnect historic waterways or restore tidal wetlands. You know, let's say they're already in the planning process, they're trying to get funding to get to 30% design, or whatever the stage might be. We can include that in our process, add it to our list, try and develop it out, try to get a groundswell of support around it, and maybe even secure some funding to try and help move those projects forward towards completion. So in this phase 2 really is when we characterize a menu of adaptation strategies to try and address some of those impacts and mitigate the negative impacts. And then in phase 3, that's where we finalize all of those actions, run them through a prioritization process, and try and outline some clear benchmarks as well as timelines to achieving those individual project goals, and really kind of map out what it's going to look like to move those projects towards completion. And as well, at the same time, we're writing this all up in the plan and finalizing the draft plan. Now, all of this planning, it falls under the umbrella of nature-based solutions. So this is a restriction, let's say, maybe not restriction is the best word, but this is a condition for our funders at National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They want the majority of this work to fall under the broad umbrella of nature-based solutions. And in case you're not already familiar, just real quick, nature-based solutions are projects which try to restore, enhance, or mimic natural processes often relying on natural or green infrastructure. So this graphic here is from NOAA. It kind of shows some examples of what we're talking about when we're talking about green infrastructure. And so it can be things like building barrier islands or bioswales, or restoring historic floodplain, or other hydrologic function, installing large woody debris in waterways, you know, planting coastal vegetation like eelgrass in the estuaries, building setback levees, etc. So the components may vary, but often, you know, the goals are the same: trying to absorb and redirect floodwaters or improve water quality, or any number of other impacts trying to mitigate. So these are really like the green structural type solutions. We can also have non-structural solutions that include things like updating zoning or other planning and management, or we can have hybrid solutions that maybe involve a little bit of gray infrastructure like culverts and tide gates and bridges and that kind of a thing, but largely rely on a natural or a green infrastructure type solution. So the outcomes that we're hoping for in this process are, you know, we can categorize into short and long term. The short term, local jurisdictions and community partners hopefully understand better what the local threats and needs are, to improve their understanding of what their coastal resilience threats and vulnerabilities might be that they can expect down the road. And then the ERAPs hopefully will enable those jurisdictions to understand the scope, the impacts, costs, and benefits of potential adaptation actions, and be able to prioritize them based on a variety of planning contingencies, and be empowered to implement those resilience projects. So in the long term, we want local communities well poised to craft proposals for funding, which we're happy to assist with and support. Estuarine communities will meet multi-year resilience goals, so updating resilience plans, projects, and activities, and trying to advance those towards completion. And for the completed plans to be integrated with current planning efforts, such as the natural hazard mitigation plans or estuary management plans. And then eventually all coastal jurisdictions will be empowered to participate in the process. So I mentioned we've done Tillamook and Coos. We're just wrapping that up And then moving on to Lincoln and Lane now. So we still have, let's see, what, 3 other counties. So that's going to be Douglas and Curry and Clatsop will be the 3 remaining counties that, you know, pending funding and capacity, somewhere down the road, we'll be able to engage them in a similar planning process, and they can learn from all the work that's gone on in the counties prior. So I just want to give you a quick example from one of our adaptation action sheets, spreadsheets. So for Tillamook and Coos, we were able to plan out in Tillamook, we had 31 adaptation actions were planned in 5 estuaries. Down in Coos Bay, because we were partnering with the Institute for Policy Research and Engagement, and they had another FEMA grant to help with some of this work, and they had a whole team of grad students working on it. We were actually able to plan out more than 70 actions just for the Coos estuary, and many of those were non-structural in nature or very broad-ranging and large geographic scope, and then, you know, a few dozen were also very site-specific. And so then down in the Coquille, we ran a separate process there that was parallel to Coos, and we were able to identify 29 more projects in the Coquille River estuary. So, you know, altogether, that's quite a lot of projects and quite a lot of work that was identified. And again, some of this is still in the idea phase, but I'd say it's about a third of it is in the idea phase, about another third of it is in the planning phase, and then another third of it is already in more advanced stages, so in the design permitting stages. So you can see here, if you can decipher the details on this graphic, or if you can even read it from where you're sitting, you know, in the big column on the left, we see the action, a description of it there. So we have things like upgrading and clearing undersized culverts, restoring riparian habitat, tide gate replacements, drainage district upgrades, these kinds of things. And I have, see if I can use a laser pointer here. If you can see this, we have a status column. So you can see the status of these projects really varies. This one's at 60% design, while this one's still just a project idea. The Lampa Creek one, it says OWEB grant submitted. I think they actually got that grant, so they can move forward with some of their plans, while others are seeking additional funding. And so it's really all over the place, but you can see these green columns. This was our prioritization process. We evaluated them based on ease, so low, medium, highs of low ease, so very easy to implement versus high, it's difficult. Impact, low, medium, high. Does it have what level of impact does it have on resilience in the estuary? Estimated cost, roughly, there's 3 categories, $1, $2, or $3 signs, so up to 100,000, 100,000 to $1 million, or over $1 million. And then just general priority ranking, low, medium, or high. So you can see there's some variance there, but once you have that, and we can look at all, you know, 70+ actions, we can start to see like where we should really focus our energy and our efforts to move these projects forward. And then, you know, we have other information here, identifying what are some of the funding sources, some general timelines and milestones that we can expect toward implementing these projects. So this is just a selection of a handful of projects out of the many that we have. And actually, there's many more details on this spreadsheet. And this is all going into our final Estuarine Resilience action plans. And then finally, just an example of some of the Lincoln and Lane County partners and supporters that we've already been able to confirm through this process, you know, when we were submitting this grant last year. And so some of these folks have committed to participating in this process. MidCoast Watersheds Council, of course, at the top of the list there. We also have the Siuslaw Watershed Council. They're going to be helping to lead efforts for the Siuslaw estuary. And then a whole host of other partners and supporters. And there will be many more added to this list in the coming months. So I'll be reaching out to folks very soon. We'll start kicking off the process with some meetings, probably happening, you know, once every other month or so. And we'll be doing stakeholder outreach and engagement efforts probably through the fall and winter. And trying to engage, you know, a broader selection of the community to hear about the concerns. And that's what I have for you today. Do I still
Any,
have folks? Oh, there we go, okay.
hey, unless we have any questions specifically for Michael right now, I might ask, Cheryl and Megan, grab one of those black chairs and we'll get, reset up here and have, some time for questions for all the folks and, yeah, so get to brainstorming a question here, while I pull up our original, slideshow. Michael, if you wouldn't mind stopping and sharing your screen. All right, now I can just scoot right front and center if you don't mind. And then, if you wouldn't mind just speaking into this microphone, when you talk, just so everyone can hear you clear. And then let me pull up Michael so we can see him too. There he is. Like he's right there with us. Okay. So, nice. I have a question here. Let me just hide that. To start off, is what role do your respective organizations play in the creation of the policy as in regards to the estuary? Is it direct or is it more indirect? Or yeah, I guess I'll pass it over to you for that.
Michael probably is the best person to answer this question. The state, the Lincoln County Estuary Management Plan has policies within that plan that direct the management unit, objectives, as well as, when the plan was first written, those were fed into, the classification of the management units and the, types of allowable uses as well. But we don't, we have not, updated policies within the estuary management plan unless, we're required to under, the guidance of the state. And if, so for instance, if they updated, and included special regulatory, actions that we needed to implement related to climate change, that would have to come from a state directive to give us the authority to have that, power to regulate for certain things for climate change and estuary management.
Should we let Moses chime in?
Let me just speak, can you guys speak the microphone closer to your mouth?
Oh, sure, sorry.
Michael, do you want to step in and talk about the role the state plays?
You're on mute.
I don't know if he can hear us. Okay.
I know.
Well, I'll say MidCoast Watersheds Council is not a regulatory organization. We're a nonprofit watershed council.
Me on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I couldn't unmute. Yeah, definitely, DLCD, my agency, so we're the agency that's tasked with overseeing, the coastal goals. So the estuary management plans, all of that regulatory, process comes, through our agency, through our commission. And probably the best person to answer that would be, either Meg Reed or Rhiannon Bezor, at DLCD. But as far as my process, the Estuary Resilience Action Plans, there's nothing regulatory about it. It's all on a voluntary basis. So I don't have to wield the stick of regulation at all, which is great. I just get to engage people on a goodwill basis. So it's a perk of the job.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ted.
For the new estuary management plan, what guidelines does it provide for the kind of activities that can be conducted in the uplands surrounding the estuary itself? So you'll have a natural area. If you want to keep it natural, we think there might be some constraints on what kind of activities are appropriate, in the properties uphill from it. It doesn't speak to that.
Are we able to like go back through our presentation and
Yeah.
show?
Yeah. If you just click that back there, it'll be correct. You gotta go through Michael's. Okay, there.
So sorry. Okay, I'll talk while I'm searching for the picture, but the upland portion, so the jurisdictional boundary of the estuary again is mean high water or the line of non-aquatic vegetation, whichever's further landward. The upland portion is dictated by zoning in goal 17. So goal 17 is the coastal shoreland. And if there are inventoried natural resource features that are part of our goal 17 inventory, such as, like for instance, if there was riparian vegetation on the upland portion of a natural management unit, which frequently those two coincide, or if there is a significant marsh that's on the upland portion, because of however topography defines that area. Those are, those inventoried features have strict 50-foot setbacks for all proposed development, if the zoning even allows development in those areas. So I can only speak for the unincorporated part of Lincoln County. I don't have the zoning map here, but 95% of our county is zoned timber conservation or agricultural conservation. It's primarily timber conservation, which means that development is not outright permitted in those areas. So, and you can tell. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm good at speaking loud. Okay, so, for instance, you see all this green here, the primary zoning is timber conservation. So for instance, but you know, timber conservation means that you can harvest trees. So, you don't see subdivisions here, but you see trees, and those areas are subject to the Forest Management Practices Act. So, and that's not something that we can regulate through our branch of government, but what we can regulate is to the disallowance of subdivisions and residential uses on timber conservation zoned land. So that acts to, in whatever way you want to regard that, as a measure of what allowable uses are on the upland portion of the estuary adjacent to natural management units. So, do you have a follow-up question to that?
Just maybe clarify then, the estuary management plan, is that used to inform decisions about what's appropriate in, for development of an adjacent, upland area?
The zoning dictates the allowable uses on the upland areas.
But is that completely divorced then from what's in the estuary management plan?
Well,
So you know, you've got a natural area, you've got areas where you could put roads or something like that, which might result in a sedimentation that would come in and could alter a natural area. I'm just being hypothetical, but I'm just wondering, are you connecting these different management systems? You've got your zoning system, you've got your estuary management plan. Do they get integrated?
well, these units have been designated and the zoning has been designated since the early 80s, and they haven't changed. So there is no alternative zoning that would protect trees from being cut in the timber conservation zone, besides a conservation organization buying out that land and not clear cutting it. So we can't regulate that through our zoning, but what we can regulate is where and how development can occur based on the zoning layout. And I can tell you that unless you're buying land adjacent to natural management units, it will always have the risk of being cut based on the zoning. Actually, irregardless of the zoning, if it's residential, it can still be cut. So unless someone owns it that doesn't want to cut it, or the Forest Management Practices Act prevents it from being cut, there is a threat of those types of things for the estuary.
Okay, we'll move on, because we'll catch up some other time.
Okay, well,
I'll just follow up on that question, Ted, that's a good question. And I look at it as some of us have been dealing with the Clean Water Act implementation strategy. So on the upper portion of where the yellow is, upstream, some of us are in the Yaquina TMDL process, total maximum. It's a plan to improve water quality from that upstream. At that point, that's divorced from the lower portion of the Yaquina, which is gonna have to write a TMDL as well. I'm sure Michael knows that. And so that's on the horizon. That will potentially do the same thing that we're talking about, that is where can we protect, where can we restore, where should we do these conservation opportunities, which would be a climate adaptation, natural climate solution opportunities, all those things from my mind would lead us in that direction for actions. So it's the 30 or 40 that you've identified, Michael, there's probably a whole lot more that could be added to that as opportunities before they're cut or before they're developed. Does that make sense? Chad, is that good?
I hear where you're going. I think we're kind of in parallel tracks.
Right.
Do we want to go to some online questions? It seems like a lot of folks have questions online.
Mr. Moses, do you have estuary fire hazard planning for invasive species like for Alsea Bay estuary, European beach grass, and Scotch broom?
Moses, were you able to hear that?
Yeah.
I think Karen needs the
Oh,
microphone.
he keeps getting muted.
To my knowledge, there's not anything that's specific for fire hazard planning related to estuaries and invasive species, but I know down in Bandon, they have a big problem with gorse, of course, and the fire hazard that poses. And so there are some local groups there, the gorse group control group, that are planning for, how to mitigate that hazard. But as far as something at the state level, that would be probably in another agency, not for mine. But we did include that when we were doing our parallel effort in the Coquille. We included a couple of actions that were related to addressing the gorse issue and the fire hazard issue with that. Like, for example, Bullard's Beach State Park, and then also just trying to secure some funding for that gorse control group so that they can continue doing their work. So if that's something that comes up with LCA, then happy to have those discussions with stakeholders.
We have another one for you. Will DLCD have funding for estuary restoration for bridges and tide gates with fish passage?
I think ODFW normally handles the fish passage funding, and DLCD does have some new grant funding. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you what exactly it's focused on. It just came through with the new bipartisan infrastructure law dollars, and it's another department. But we do have some funds for planning and local jurisdictions. But I think for a lot of fish passage work, you're going to have to go to OWEB or ODFW.
Can we do a quick time check? Tom, how are we doing?
7:43.
Yeah, we're good. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah.
I have a quick one. Are the planning projects on the DLCD website?
Sorry, let's say again.
Are the planning projects on the DLCD website?
Not yet, because I just hit my deadline last week, and we actually have a few little bells and whistles to finish up in the plans. So they'll be available sometime in the coming weeks. And we're still debating about where exactly to put those, make them available online. But they'll become available at some point, and we'll put them out in the wild. And I can let you folks know.
Sorry, kind of Nikolai.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, is there an opportunity in this process to give a high priority to water quality, not just the sediment coming down from forestry, but water quality in terms of bacteria toxins? Oregon Department of Agriculture Commercial Shellfish Program is very focused and interested in that, as well as anybody who's a shellfish farmer and probably anybody who eats shellfish from the estuary. But it just, you know, when I read the draft estuary management plan, it just doesn't seem to pop out as a really significant priority, compared to some of the other ones.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it can be really confusing because there are different entities that oversee different things. So the estuary management plan is really a land use planning document. And there are other groups that are looking at water quality specifically. So that TMDL group that Paul was talking about. And then there's also a group with a very similar name to MidCoast Watersheds Council. It's called MidCoast Water Planning Partnership. And they are really focused on water quality. And I think some of our board members, maybe Mike Royley, who's not here tonight, are also involved in that process. And I think they could speak about that better than I could. I'm really focused on estuaries.
Yeah, but if I can comment.
Sure.
There's a relationship between land use planning and the quality of water in the estuary.
I completely agree. Yeah. Go ahead, Anna.
I work with Megan, so I'm one of the planners, and but there are, and Ted, you spotted it too, that there are these different programs that have a different piece of this whole phenomenon, and it's easy to look at that and say, yikes, there's a lack of connectivity there, or they're kind of disjointed, and how do we deal with this and how do we deal with that? But increasingly, I think it's a strength, because we're attacking these problems from different angles. And what I find particularly exciting is that these things are all beginning to come together now. And we're beginning to have resources at a scale that was unimaginable. I first moved to Lincoln County in 1989. I did a wetland conservation plan inventory for the city of Toledo. I saw a name on that screen, Ken Beerley, if you can hear me, one of the real pioneers of this whole movement. And as an old timer who was kind of there at the beginning of helping to create the Watershed Council stuff, I'm just so deeply impressed at how much work is underway, the scale of it, the intensity of it. And so it's easy to look at any one of these pieces and say, it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. But the mosaic that we have now in place, again, with the talent and the resources that are in place, we are on the threshold of doing something that many of us old timers that were at the dawn of this would have never imagined that we would be where we're at right now. And the trajectory is just so overwhelming to look at. So, and Matt Spangler, whose name should have been mentioned earlier, was one of the first people that has been part of this community, was there as a young man in creating the plan. When he was first job coming out of college, going to the planning department, and now in his retirement, he helped do a lot of the legwork to update the plan. But that was also one of his comments, is that people try that there's only so much that the land use program has accomplished so much, and it's underappreciated by Oregonians. But it needs to be now layered on with these other pieces, because I could get into the legal reasons why we can't do this and we can't do that. But I think we have pulled together in the leadership of Paul Engelmeyer, again, one of the early players in this whole arena. It just gets me really excited. And I just want to stick around long enough to see how it really finally plays out.
Thanks for that perspective, Anna. We appreciate that.
So
Yeah, thank you for that historical context, mentioning those people. And I think it goes without saying that, you know, there are tons of partners, and we weren't able to mention them all tonight, but many, many people, many, many organizations contribute to all of these efforts. Do we have time for another question, Tom?
I think one more question.
Okay, Carrie, do you want to go to an online one? I know there were a lot.
Sorry, there's a lot of comments as well.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Is the Watershed Council umbrella up and down the Oregon coast able to tap into the the two streams of the, Inflation Reduction Act money specifically through that NOAA program for sea level rise mitigation, risk mitigation and, wetland conservation. Are you gonna see some of those funds?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We are going for lots of grant funding right now, and I think that's true for every watershed council that we interact with. We may not be the main applicant on those, but we are working with other organizations to get projects included. Ryan was asking about the infrastructure money that's going around and a lot of the NOAA grants and other things. They're big regional grants, and so you know, they're not going to fund a single individual project, but if we can put together competitive applications that are sort of regional in scope and have many projects, again, it's a way for multiple organizations right now to get funded to do really good work. And so basically throughout this fall and winter, we're constantly attending those webinars and getting projects in for all of those. And so, yes, there will be infrastructure money coming to do work here at MidCoast with our partners and then at other watershed councils up and down the coast.
And if I may jump in as well, just to respond to that, as well as to what Anna was saying, it's true, there's a lot of, there's a groundswell of support happening right now, and there's a lot happening. It's really hard to keep track of as someone who that's part of what I need to do is be keeping track of it. But we're at the right moment right now for a lot of this to be going on, because I just wrapped up this process of planning in Tillamook and Coos, and then all of this NOAA money and BIL dollars came available, and I submitted a letter of interest last week for one of the regional grants that NOAA's doing, and we were able to take a suite of projects from that spreadsheet that I showed you and present them to NOAA to say, hey, look, can you throw a few million at it so we can take this group of resilience project priorities, and we already have community buy-in, we already have support and partnerships and relationships built with all the partners. And they're ready to go, and so we're hoping that we can get those funded. But if not, that was kind of the thinking from the outset. 3 years ago in pre-coronial times, that if we could just tee up the ball for folks, and once the money comes available, then these projects could get implemented really quickly. And I was thinking that these projects were going to be a 10 or 20 year time horizon, and now it's looking like a lot of these we might be able to get implemented in the next 5 years. So, I think the time is now to really put together all of this planning and move forward.
Thank you, Moses. Yeah, that was a really great point. And I think being part of the ERAP process that Moses is talking about will help us all accomplish and get more funding, and having something in place like this FIP allows us to leverage the funding that we already have. We're committed to getting match and things like that. So once you have some of these things in place, it makes you more competitive for additional funding. So we're really well positioned right now. All right. Thank you.
Sweet. Well, that about wraps it up for the evening. Thank you so much to all our speakers. We're going to take a quick break and then reconvene for a very brief MidCoast board meeting. So if you're interested in the nitty-gritty of the boring side of this, you are welcome to stay. But for all folks who are just interested in presentation, yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break, reconvene. And thank you everyone online for coming. Thank you all in person. Good to see some new faces here. And yeah, thanks for coming. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.